Welcome to Anime Vault, where we break down the most gripping, action packed, and thought provoking episodes in the anime world. Today, we are diving deep into one of the most emotional and action packed episodes of Invincible, Season 3, Episode 6, titled All I Can Say Is I'm Sorry. This episode doesn't just deliver high stakes superhero action, it cuts deep into the emotional cost of heroism, the unseen tragedies behind massive battles, and the devastating consequences of revenge. From intense fight sequences to heartbreaking moments of loss, this episode captures everything that makes Invincible one of the best superhero stories of our time. Buckle up, because this is going to be a long, in-depth breakdown of Invincible Season 3, Episode 6. Opening flashback. The catalyst for tragedy. The episode begins with a haunting flashback, taking us back to one of the most devastating battles in the entire Invincible series, the fight between Mark Grayson, Invincible, and his father, Nolan, Omni-Man, in Chicago. This wasn't just another superhero battle. This was a war. Omni-Man's assault on Earth, his betrayal, and the brutal way he tore through the city left thousands dead and even more wounded. The city was left in ruins, with bodies lying in the rubble, families shattered, and lives forever changed. And one of those lives belonged to Scott Duvall. Scott was just a normal man, a scientist working for the Global Defense Agency, GDA, until that fateful day. During the destruction of Chicago, his sister, Jess, and his young niece, Gretchen, were killed right in front of him. Mark, still inexperienced and struggling to stop his father, had tried to save them, but failed. For Mark, it was another tragic moment in a fight he was already losing. But for Scott, it was the moment his world fell apart. He would never forget it, and he would never forgive it. Grief, justice, and the road to revenge. The episode jumps forward to the present, where Scott Duvall has spent the last few years drowning in grief and anger. But grief alone wasn't enough. He wanted justice. He wanted someone to be held accountable for the deaths of his sister and niece. So Scott started a petition. He gathered over 3,000 signatures from people who had lost loved ones in superhero battles, people who believed that superheroes should be held responsible for the destruction they caused. But when Scott takes his case to the authorities, he is met with cold indifference. A district attorney bluntly tells him that superheroes can't be prosecuted. If the government tried to hold them accountable, many of them might refuse to fight, leaving Earth defenseless. The people in power had decided it was better to let innocent civilians die than risk losing their strongest weapons. Scott was furious. His sister and niece weren't casualties. They were people. They had names. They had lives. But no one cared. And so, Scott made a decision. If the system wouldn't hold superheroes accountable, he would. Becoming Powerplex, a villain or a victim? Scott didn't just want revenge. He wanted power. Using his expertise in energy science, he experimented on himself, unlocking an ability he had previously never fully understood. Scott had always had the ability to absorb kinetic energy and convert it into raw electrical power. But now, through experimentation, he had learned how to weaponize it. Scott Duvall was gone. He had become Powerplex target? Invincible. Powerplex versus Invincible. The first battle. Fueled by rage and grief, Powerplex publicly challenges Invincible, hoping to finally make him pay for the destruction he caused in Chicago. But Mark, exhausted from constant battles and desperate for a moment of peace, ignores the challenge. He just wants to enjoy a rare break, a small celebration for his best friend William's birthday. This enrages Powerplex. When Invincible doesn't show up, Powerplex instead attacks the Guardians of the Globe, targeting Shapesmith, who steps up to fight him. But Shapesmith is no match for Powerplex's energy-based attacks. He gets blasted out of the fight, leaving Powerplex standing victorious. But instead of pressing the attack, Powerplex retreats, fearing that the GDA will come after him. The family behind the mask, the cost of obsession. Despite his quest for vengeance, Scott still has a family, his wife, Becky, and their young son, Jack. Becky is worried. She sees how Scott is spiraling deeper into obsession and rage, and she fears that he's losing himself in his mission for revenge. Jack, their son, is completely unaware of what his father is doing. To him, Scott is just dad, a man who loves him and tells him bedtime stories. But as Scott's hatred for Invincible consumes him, the distance between him and his family grows wider. Becky pleads with him to stop, to let go of his anger before it destroys him. But Scott won't listen. Not yet. The final confrontation, a battle with tragic consequences. Scott finally gets his chance. During a memorial for the victims of the Chicago battle, Powerplex ambushes Invincible. This time, Mark has no choice but to fight. But as the two clash, Mark does something unexpected. He tries to reason with Scott. He tells Scott that he never wanted any of this, that he was just a kid when he fought his father, that he made mistakes. But Scott doesn't care. You may not have killed my family, he says, but you didn't save them either. The battle intensifies, and in the chaos, something terrible happens. Scott loses control of his powers. A massive explosion of energy surges outward, and when the dust clears, Becky and Jack are dead. Scott falls to his knees, staring in horror. He had spent so much time trying to destroy Invincible that he destroyed his own family instead. Broken and defeated, Scott is arrested by the GDA. Even as he is taken away, his hatred still burns. "This isn't over," he whispers. Themes and symbolism, the unseen cost of heroism. This episode explores powerful and painful themes, including the victims of superhero battles. Every time a city is destroyed, lives are ruined. But who holds superheroes accountable? The path from grief to vengeance. How unresolved loss can turn even good people into villains. The cost of obsession. Scott's hatred cost him everything, including his own family. The weight of responsibility. Mark is constantly forced to carry the blame for things beyond his control. Final thoughts. Invincible Season 3, Episode 6 is a gut-wrenching, powerful story that goes beyond superhero fights. It's about loss, revenge, and the unintended consequences of war. With stunning animation, emotional storytelling, and unforgettable action, this episode proves once again why Invincible is one of the best superhero shows of all time. This has been another deep dive into the fascinating world of anime and animation. This is Anime Vault, where every frame tells a story. Stay tuned for more breakdowns of the episodes that challenge the way we see the world.